The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the small hospital room as evening settled into night. Ethan Miller's calloused hands, worn from years of working on cars, held his daughter's smaller one with infinite gentleness. Lily's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her face flushed with fever against the stark white hospital pillow. "I'm right here, sweetheart," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of quiet reassurance. The steady beeping of monitors created a mechanical lullaby that filled the room. He brushed back Lily's damp hair from her forehead, remembering how Sarah used to do the same when their daughter was just a baby. The memory of his late wife brought a familiar ache to his chest. Sarah had always known exactly what to do when Lily was sick. The right medicine, the perfect song, the most comforting touch. Now it was just him, and he prayed it would be enough. Almost without thinking, he began to hum the lullaby Sarah had sung countless times. The melody was a bit off-key, but he kept going, letting the familiar tune fill the quiet spaces between beeps and distant hospital sounds. "Sweet dreams, my angel. Close your eyes," he sang softly, the words coming back to him like old friends. His thumb traced circles on Lily's palm, a gesture that had always calmed her since she was tiny. A nurse with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair slipped into the room, checking the IV line and monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency. "Her temperature's still high, Mr. Miller," she said gently. "Try to get some rest yourself. That chair can't be comfortable." Ethan shook his head, managing a tired smile. "I'm fine right here, thanks." The thought of leaving Lily alone, even for a moment, made his heart clench. The nurse nodded, understanding in her expression, and made a few notes on her tablet before quietly leaving the room. Through the night, different nurses came and went like clockwork, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. Each time, Ethan maintained his vigil, his back growing stiffer in the hard plastic chair but his grip on Lily's hand never wavering. During one of these check-ins, Dr. Ramirez entered the room. She moved with quiet authority, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She studied Lily's charts, then watched Ethan for a long moment as he dabbed his daughter's forehead with a cool cloth. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "you've been here for hours. Perhaps you'd like to take a short break? The cafeteria is still open." Ethan looked up, dark circles prominent under his eyes. "Thank you, doctor, but I need to stay. When she wakes up, I want her to see a familiar face." Dr. Ramirez's expression softened. She'd seen countless parents in this room over the years, but something about Ethan's quiet determination struck a chord deep within her. As midnight passed, Ethan's mind drifted through memories of the years since Sarah's passing. He remembered Lily's first day of school, how brave she'd been despite her trembling lower lip. The time she'd won the art contest in 3rd grade, her face beaming with pride as she held up her drawing of their little family. Just the two of them now, but still whole in their own way. He thought about the long days at the auto shop, racing to finish jobs so he could make it to her school performances on time. The nights spent helping with homework at their small kitchen table, both of them tired but pushing through together. Every sacrifice had been worth it to see her grow into the bright, loving child she'd become. A particularly loud beep from one of the monitors startled him from his reverie. Lily stirred slightly, her face contorting in discomfort, and Ethan leaned forward, squeezing her hand. "Shh, it's okay, baby girl. Daddy's here." Through the window, he could see the hospital parking lot lights, creating islands of yellow in the darkness. More nurses came and went, checking temperatures, adjusting medications, offering him coffee which he accepted with grateful nods. Dr. Ramirez returned several times throughout the night, her presence becoming a steady comfort. She moved with careful precision, checking Lily's vitals herself, making small adjustments to medications. Each time, she glanced at Ethan with growing respect, noting how he never dozed off despite his obvious exhaustion. The hours crept by like molasses. Ethan's back screamed for relief, but he only shifted position slightly, never letting go of Lily's hand. He prayed continuously, sometimes in whispers, sometimes silently, the words becoming a lifeline in the quiet darkness. Finally, the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky outside the window. The night shift nurses were preparing to hand over to the day team when Lily's breathing changed subtly. Ethan noticed it immediately, sitting up straighter despite his stiff muscles. Dr. Ramirez entered just then for another check, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at the monitors. "Her temperature is dropping," she said, quickly moving to examine Lily more closely. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest as he watched Lily's face. The angry flush of fever was fading, and her breathing seemed easier. He dabbed her forehead again with the damp cloth, his hands trembling slightly with fatigue and hope. Lily's eyelids fluttered, and a small sigh escaped her lips. "Doctor." Ramirez checked the readings again, a smile touching her usually composed features. "This is very encouraging, Mr. Miller. The fever is definitely breaking." The morning light streaming through the blinds painted stripes across the hospital bed as Ethan continued his gentle ministrations, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. The night's vigil had left him drained, but his heart was lighter than it had been since rushing Lily to the emergency room. Dr. Ramirez stood quietly at the foot of the bed, watching father and daughter with an expression that held both professional satisfaction and something deeper, more personal. The scene before her spoke of a love that could move mountains, or perhaps, she thought, break fevers against all expectations. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting warm rectangles across the linoleum floor. The harsh fluorescent lights from the night before had given way to this gentler illumination, transforming the sterile room into something almost peaceful. Ethan Miller stood at his daughter's bedside, his shoulders tight from spending the night in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Despite his exhaustion, his eyes remained fixed on Lily's face, watching each breath she took. The change in her was subtle, but unmistakable. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm now, unlike the labored breathing that had terrified him through the darkness. The angry flush of fever had faded from her cheeks, leaving behind the familiar dusting of freckles across her nose. The door opened with a soft click, and Dr. Ramirez entered, her white coat pristine and her silver-streaked hair neatly pulled back. She carried a clipboard in one hand and offered Ethan a warm smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority that had comforted him throughout the night. "Morning, Dr. Ramirez," Ethan replied, his voice rough from lack of sleep. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the fog of exhaustion. "She seems better?" Dr. Ramirez approached the bed, checking the monitors and making notes on her clipboard. "Yes, she does. Her temperature has normalized, and her vitals are much more stable." She glanced up at Ethan, her dark eyes kind. "You know, sometimes a parent's presence can be as powerful as any medication we administer. Your staying with her through the night might have made more difference than you realize." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. His hands, still bearing traces of engine grease that wouldn't quite wash away, fidgeted with the edge of Lily's blanket. I couldn't leave her. Not when she needed me." "Dad?" Lily's voice, though weak, drew both adults' attention immediately. Her eyes fluttered open, still glazed with remnants of sleep and illness. "Hey, sweetheart," Ethan said softly, leaning closer. "I'm right here." Dr. Ramirez stepped back slightly, giving them space while still monitoring the situation. She watched as Ethan brushed Lily's dark hair away from her forehead with tender care. "You stayed all night?" Lily asked, her small hand reaching for his. "Of course I did." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Ramirez observed the interaction, noting how Ethan's entire body seemed to relax just hearing his daughter's voice. But she also saw the shadow of fear that crossed his face, a fear she recognized all too well from her years of practice and her own personal experience. "Mr. Miller," she said gently, "could we step into the hallway for a moment? Just to discuss a few things?" Ethan hesitated, his grip on Lily's hand tightening slightly. "It's okay, Dad," Lily said, showing wisdom beyond her years. "I'm feeling better, really." In the hallway, Dr. Ramirez turned to face Ethan. The morning light from the nearby window highlighted the worry lines etched around his eyes. "The fever breaking is a very positive sign," she began, "but I can see how worried you still are." Ethan's shoulders sagged, as if finally allowing himself to show some of the weight he carried. "I can't lose her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After Sarah, my wife, He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Dr. Ramirez's expression softened further. "Mr. Miller," I've been a doctor for over 25 years, and I've learned that healing isn't just about medicine. The love and dedication I saw from you last night, that matters. That makes a difference. But what if it's not enough? The words seemed to escape before Ethan could stop them. What if I'm not enough? You are enough, Doctor, Ramirez said firmly. The way you stayed with her, the way you fought through your own exhaustion to be there for her, that's exactly what she needs. Sometimes love is the strongest medicine we have. Before Ethan could respond, a nurse approached pushing a cart with breakfast trays. Morning, Dr. Ramirez. I've got breakfast for the patient in 204 and her father. I'm not hungry, Ethan started to say, but Dr. Ramirez held up a hand. You need to keep up your strength too, Mr. Miller. For her. The nurse wheeled the cart into Lily's room, and Ethan followed, drawn back to his daughter's side, as if by magnetic force. Doctor? Ramirez lingered in the doorway, watching as Ethan helped Lily sit up against her pillows, adjusting them with careful attention to her comfort. You should eat too, Dad, Lily said, echoing the doctor's concerns with childlike directness. I will, sweetheart. Don't worry about me. Dr. Ramirez stood quietly observing the scene, her clipboard pressed against her chest. The morning light caught the silver in her hair as she watched father and daughter together, noting how Ethan's entire being seemed focused on Lily's well-being, even at the expense of his own. Something in his unwavering devotion touched a deep chord within her, bringing back memories of her own losses and triumphs in these very halls. She made a mental note to keep a closer eye on this case, to do more than just the standard rounds. Some patients, some families, needed more than just medical attention. Sometimes they needed someone to stand with them, to help shoulder the weight of their fears and hopes. The afternoon sun had mellowed, casting long shadows across the hospital room. The steady rhythm of medical equipment had become a familiar backdrop, punctuated only by the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the hallway outside. Lily lay peacefully in her bed, her chest rising and falling in the gentle cadence of sleep. Her face, still pale but no longer flushed with fever, looked almost angelic against the white hospital pillowcase. In the corner chair, Ethan's chin had dropped to his chest, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion after the endless night. His work-worn hands rested in his lap, grease still visible beneath his fingernails despite his best efforts to scrub them clean before coming to the hospital. The morning's relief had settled into his bones, making his guard drop just enough for sleep to claim him. Dr. Ramirez appeared in the doorway, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She paused, taking in the scene before her. Her experienced eyes noted the dark circles under Ethan's eyes, the wrinkles in his shirt that spoke of too many hours without changing. With gentle consideration, she approached and touched his shoulder. Mr. Miller, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. I need to speak with you about Lily's test results. Ethan jerked awake, immediately alert. Is something wrong? His voice was rough with sleep and worry. Dr. Ramirez pulled up another chair, positioning herself so she could speak quietly without disturbing Lily. The blood work has come back, she began, her tone measured and professional, though her eyes held compassion. We've identified why Lily's been having these fevers. Ethan straightened in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. That's good, right? Now we can treat it? Yes, we can treat it, Dr. Ramirez confirmed, opening the folder. But I need to explain what we're dealing with. Lily has what we call an autoimmune disorder. It's rare, and it means her immune system is attacking her own body. The color drained from Ethan's face. Like cancer? No, not cancer, Dr. Ramirez assured him quickly. But it is serious. Her body needs help to function properly, and that means ongoing treatment. Regular medications, monitoring, and possibly periodic hospital stays when symptoms flare up. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. How much? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How much is this going to cost? Dr. Ramirez pulled out several papers, showing him the treatment plan. As Ethan's eyes scanned the numbers, his shoulders slumped further with each line. The cost of medications alone was more than his monthly rent. His voice cracked. I'm just a mechanic. I work extra shifts when I can, but... He gestured helplessly at the papers. This is impossible. My insurance barely covers the basics." Dr. Ramirez watched as the morning's hope crumbled in Ethan's eyes. The strong facade he'd maintained through the night began to crack. "The shop's been slow lately," he continued, the words spilling out now. "I've been picking up side jobs, but with Lily sick, I've had to take time off. The rent's already late this month, and now this." He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold back tears of frustration. "Mr. Miller, doctor." Ramirez leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "There are programs we can look into, payment plans we can discuss. You don't have to figure this out alone." But Ethan barely seemed to hear her. His mind was racing through numbers, calculating assets he could sell, wondering if his landlord would give him more time. The weight of single parenthood, always heavy, now felt crushing. Dr. Ramirez stood, recognizing that Ethan needed time to process. "I'll have the nurse bring in some information about financial assistance programs," she said softly. "We'll talk more later." After she left, silence settled over the room again, broken only by Lily's steady breathing and the persistent beep of monitors. Ethan pushed himself up from his chair, his joints protesting after hours of sitting. He moved to Lily's bedside, his movements careful and quiet. Looking down at his sleeping daughter, he saw echoes of her mother in her delicate features. The same gentle curve of her cheeks, the same long eyelashes resting against her skin. He reached out and stroked her hair, the soft strands sliding between his fingers. "I'll find a way, baby girl," he whispered, his voice thick with determination despite the tremor of fear underneath. The afternoon sun continued its slow journey across the room, indifferent to the father's whispered promise and the mountain of worry pressing down on his shoulders. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the quiet hospital hallway. Ethan Miller stood at the coffee station, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he poured the thin, brown liquid into a paper cup. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from another sleepless night spent watching over Lily. The coffee might be terrible, but he needed something to keep him going. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. Dr. Ramirez walked toward him, her white coat crisp despite the early hour. Her face held the same gentle concern he'd seen yesterday when she delivered the news about Lily's condition. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, stopping beside him. "How's Lily doing?" "She had a good night," Ethan replied, stirring a packet of sugar into his coffee. "Actually slept through most of it." Dr. Ramirez nodded, then glanced around the empty hallway. "Would you mind if we talked for a moment?" Something in her tone made Ethan pause. He gestured to a row of chairs lined against the wall, and they both sat down, leaving one chair between them. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Ramirez began, then stopped. She folded her hands in her lap, and Ethan noticed they were shaking slightly. "What I'm about to share with you is personal, but I think you need to hear it." Ethan sat straighter, his coffee forgotten. 15 years ago, I had a son named Michael." Her voice wavered but remained steady. "He was 12 when he developed symptoms similar to Lily's. Back then, I was just starting my career, working at a small clinic in another state. We didn't have the resources or expertise to diagnose him properly." She paused, taking a deep breath. Ethan could see the pain etched in the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed as she continued. "By the time we understood what was happening, it was too late. The autoimmune response had already." She pressed her lips together, collecting herself. "I couldn't save him, and every day since then, I've dedicated myself to making sure no other parent goes through what I did." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked down at his coffee cup, not knowing what to say. "Mr. Miller, I know you're facing an impossible situation," Dr. Ramirez continued. "The medical bills, the long-term care Lily will need, it's overwhelming. But I can help you navigate this system. I know every program, every financial aid option available. I can advocate for Lily's case with the hospital board." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Dr. Ramirez, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this isn't charity," she cut in firmly. "This is one parent reaching out to another. I've seen how devoted you are to Lily, how hard you're fighting. But you don't have to fight alone. I'm her father," Ethan said, his voice rough. "It's my job to take care of her. I've been doing it since Sarah died, and I'll keep doing it." "And you're doing an amazing job, Doctor," Ramirez said softly. "But think about Lily. This isn't about pride or proving something. It's about giving her the best chance possible. Ethan stood up abruptly, the coffee sloshing in his cup. I can't. I don't want people feeling sorry for us. We're not some charity case. Dr. Ramirez rose too, her eyes meeting his with understanding but also determination. Mr. Miller, accepting help doesn't make you weak. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let others stand beside us. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. When you're ready to talk, call me. Anytime, day or night. She placed it on the chair between them. Ethan watched as she walked away down the hallway, her words echoing in his mind. The business card sat there like a challenge, or maybe a lifeline. He thought of Lily in her hospital bed, of the mountains of paperwork waiting at home, of the bills that kept piling up. His fingers twitched toward the card, but his pride held him back. A nurse passed by with a breakfast cart, the wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, warming the sterile hallway. Ethan picked up the card, turning it over in his hands as he stood there, caught between his need to prove he could handle everything alone, and the quiet voice inside that whispered, "Maybe, just maybe, doctor." Ramirez was right. The fluorescent hospital lights cast long shadows as Ethan bent down to kiss Lily's forehead. Her skin felt cooler now, almost normal. "I'll be back before you know it, sweetheart," he whispered, adjusting her blanket one last time. "Promise?" Lily's voice was small, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Cross my heart." He made an X over his chest, their special gesture since she was tiny. "Try to get some sleep, okay?" The night nurse, Sandra, gave him a reassuring nod from the doorway. "We'll take good care of her, Mr. Miller. Don't worry." The drive to Jim's auto shop felt longer than usual. Ethan's old pickup truck rumbled through the quiet streets, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. His toolbox rattled in the back, the same one he'd had since his apprentice days, now dented but reliable, like everything else in his life. The garage's harsh lights buzzed overhead as Ethan pulled on his worn work coveralls. Mike, his supervisor, stood in the office doorway with arms crossed. "Look who finally showed up. Thought maybe you'd quit on us. Just needed to handle some family matters," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. He grabbed his tools and headed for the first car, a Mercedes with transmission problems. "Family matters," Mike scoffed. "Another single dad who'll fold under pressure. Seen it before." He shook his head. "That German import better be done by morning." Ethan's hands tightened around his wrench, but he said nothing. The familiar smell of oil and metal surrounded him as he got to work. Hours passed in a blur of repairs. The Mercedes, 2 brake jobs, an alternator replacement. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion and too much coffee, making simple tasks take twice as long. Around midnight, he drove to Ray's pawn shop on the edge of town. The neon "open" sign flickered weakly in the window. Inside, the familiar musty smell of old electronics and forgotten treasures greeted him. "Evening, Ray," Ethan said, placing his grandfather's pocket watch on the counter. The gold case caught the dim light, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. Ray, an elderly man with thick glasses, examined the watch carefully. "Nice piece. Family heirloom?" Ethan nodded, throat tight. "Need to sell it. Medical bills?" Ray asked quietly, having seen that look before. Another nod. Ray named a fair price, more than market value. When Ethan tried to protest, the old man waved him off. "Got a granddaughter myself. Some things matter more than business." Back at the garage, Ethan worked through the rest of his shift in a fog of exhaustion. The money from the watch felt heavy in his pocket, nowhere near enough for what Lily needed, but it was something. Meanwhile, in the hospital room, Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair usually occupied by Ethan. She'd brought a stack of children's books and a fresh box of crayons. "Which story would you like first?" she asked Lily, who was propped up against her pillows. "Can we draw instead?" Lily asked shyly. "Daddy says Mom used to draw with me when I was really little." Dr. Ramirez's expression softened. "Of course we can." She pulled a small table closer to the bed and spread out some paper. As they colored together, Lily gradually opened up. She drew her house, her dad's garage, the tree in their backyard where she used to play. "Dr. Bike?" Ramirez listened, adding details to her own drawing, a garden full of flowers. "You remind me of someone," Lily said suddenly, looking up at the doctor with those searching eyes that seemed too wise for her age. "Oh, who's that?" "Like how I imagine my mom would be. Daddy says she was really kind, too." Dr. Ramirez had to look away for a moment, blinking back unexpected tears. She thought of her own son, gone too soon, and how he used to love drawing just like this. They spent the next few hours creating a whole world of colorful pictures. Lily drew herself getting better, playing outside again. Dr. Ramirez helped her add butterflies and sunshine, encouraging each hopeful stroke of crayon. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Ethan stumbled into the room. His coveralls were stained with grease, dark circles under his eyes, but he managed to smile when he saw Lily awake and animated. "Daddy, look!" Lily held up her drawing proudly. "Dr. Ramirez helped me make it. See? That's you and me and our house, and look, there's even a rainbow." The picture was full of bright colors and hope, everything Ethan was struggling to hold on to. He looked at Dr. Ramirez, who was quietly gathering her things to leave. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment something shifted. The wall of pride he'd built began to crack, just a little. "It's beautiful, baby girl," he said, moving closer to examine every detail of Lily's artwork. "You've been busy while I was gone. Dr. Ramirez knows all about drawing," Lily explained excitedly. "She showed me how to make the clouds look real. Can she come back again tomorrow?" Ethan noticed how carefully the doctor had arranged the art supplies, how she'd helped Lily create something joyful despite everything. His daughter's smile was the brightest thing he'd seen in days. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the hospital parking lot as Ethan helped Lily into his old pickup truck. Her legs were wobbly from days in bed, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. Dr. Ramirez stood nearby, clipboard in hand, reviewing the day pass instructions one final time. "Remember, no strenuous activity," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "And keep her in the shade as much as possible." Ethan nodded, carefully buckling Lily's seatbelt. "We'll be careful, Doc, promise." "I know you will." Dr. Ramirez smiled, reaching through the window to squeeze Lily's hand. "Have fun at the picnic, sweetheart." The drive to the church was short, just 10 minutes through familiar streets. Lily pressed her face against the window, drinking in every sight as if she'd been gone for years instead of weeks. Her thin fingers tapped against the glass when they passed the ice cream shop where they used to get Sunday treats. "Maybe we can stop there on the way back," Ethan said, his heart warming at her simple joy. The church parking lot was already filling up when they arrived. Colorful blankets dotted the grassy area behind the building, and the smell of grilled hot dogs and fresh-baked cookies drifted through the air. Ethan helped Lily out of the truck, keeping a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Lily! Lily's here!" A chorus of young voices rang out as several children spotted them. Mrs. Johnson, who taught Sunday school, hurried over with a lawn chair and a bright yellow cushion. "We saved you the perfect spot under the maple tree," she said, setting up the chair in the shade. "And I made those peanut butter cookies you love, dear." Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes as more people approached, each carrying dishes and warm greetings. Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, brought his famous potato salad. The Martinez family arrived with still warm enchiladas. Even old Mrs. Collins, who rarely left her house anymore, had come with her signature apple pie. "We've missed you both," Sarah from the church choir said, helping arrange the food on a nearby table. "It's not the same without Lily's smile in the children's choir." Ethan watched as Lily settled into her chair, immediately surrounded by friends who showed her their latest toys and drawings. Her laughter, clear and bright, rang across the lawn. It was a sound he hadn't heard in what felt like forever. "She looks happy," a familiar voice said beside him. Dr. Ramirez had arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a flowing blouse instead of her usual white coat. She carried a large container of rice pudding. A recipe she mentioned was her grandmother's. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan said, surprised but pleased. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, setting down her dish. "Besides, someone needs to make sure my patient follows orders about taking it easy." Throughout the afternoon, Ethan found himself relaxing more than he had in weeks. The constant weight of worry lifted slightly as he watched Lily participate in gentle games of cards and tell stories with her friends. Community members drifted by continuously, offering not just food but stories, jokes, and quiet words of support. Mike from the auto parts store clapped him on the shoulder. "We're all here for you, man. Whatever you need." Betty, the church secretary, brought over a stack of get-well cards made by the Sunday school classes. Each one was decorated with glitter and crayon drawings, filled with childish handwriting expressing love and prayers for Lily. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Pastor David called everyone together. "Let's join hands," he announced, "and lift up our dear Lily in prayer." The entire gathering, nearly 50 people, formed a large circle on the lawn. Ethan stood between Dr. Ramirez and Mrs. Johnson, Lily seated in her chair just in front of him. His daughter's small hand reached up to grasp his, warm and trusting. Pastor David's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Lord, we gather today as one family, united in love and faith for this precious child." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the strength of the hands holding his, hearing the murmured amens and quiet sniffles around the circle. Tears slid down his cheeks, but for once, they weren't tears of fear or desperation. Something long dormant stirred in his chest, a feeling of connection, of being held up by something bigger than himself. The final rays of sunlight filtered through the maple leaves, casting dappled shadows on the grass. In that moment, surrounded by his community, his daughter's hand in his, Ethan felt his faith reawaken. It wasn't just hope for Lily's healing, but faith in the goodness of people, in the power of love to sustain through the darkest times. The prayer continued, voices joining together in a gentle chorus of belief and support. Through his closed eyes, Ethan could feel the warmth of the setting sun on his face, like a tender reminder that even the longest days eventually give way to new dawns. The fluorescent lights hummed steadily in the hospital corridor as Ethan and Lily waited outside the treatment room. 3 days had passed since the church picnic, and that wonderful memory now felt like a distant dream. Lily sat in her wheelchair, absently sketching in her drawing pad while Ethan paced back and forth, checking his watch every few minutes. "Dad, you're making me dizzy," Lily said with a weak smile, looking up from her artwork. Ethan forced himself to sit down beside her. "Sorry, sweetie, just anxious to get started." He peered over at her drawing. It was a picture of the church picnic, complete with smiling stick figures holding hands in a circle. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both look up. Dr. Ramirez was walking toward them, but something was off. Her usual warm smile was missing, replaced by a tightness around her eyes that made Ethan's stomach clench. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "could we talk privately for a moment?" Ethan glanced at Lily, who had returned to her drawing. "Sure." He squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Be right back, baby girl." They stepped around the corner, just out of earshot. Dr. Ramirez clutched her clipboard tightly, her knuckles white. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I've just come from an emergency board meeting, the hospital." She paused, taking a deep breath. The hospital has been forced to cut funding for several trial treatments, including Lily's. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "What? But, you said the trial was approved. You said we were good to go." "We were. The approval was there, but the funding." "Doctor," Ramirez's voice cracked slightly. "Budget constraints have forced them to prioritize other programs. I fought for hours in that meeting, but..." "Hours?" Ethan's voice rose sharply. "You spent hours talking while my daughter's life hangs in the balance?" The fear in his chest was transforming into something harder, darker. "Please understand I did everything I could." "Everything?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "You're a doctor. You're supposed to heal people. What good are all your promises if you can't actually help her?" Dr. Ramirez flinched as if he'd struck her. "We can look for other options. There are other trials, other hospitals." "More false hope?" Ethan's words were razor sharp. "More promises you can't keep?" Around the corner, Lily called out, "Dad, is everything okay?" The sound of his daughter's voice only fueled Ethan's despair. "No, everything is not okay," he said loud enough for Lily to hear. "Doctor, Ramirez here just told me they're cutting your treatment. After all their big talk about helping us, They're just giving up. Dr. Ramirez stepped closer, her voice urgent but gentle. Ethan, please, don't do this in front of Lily. We need to stay calm and… Calm? Ethan's control snapped. My daughter is dying, and you want me to stay calm? You gave us hope. You made me believe things could get better. Was it all just talk? Just like when you told me about your son? Was that just another story to make me trust you? The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd gone too far. Dr. Ramirez's face drained of color, and she took a step back. The pain in her eyes was raw and real. I have never, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, used my son's memory as a manipulation tool. Never. Lily wheeled herself around the corner, her eyes wide with fear. Dad? Doctor? What's happening? Before either adult could respond, Lily suddenly doubled over in her chair, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't feel good, she whimpered. Ethan's anger evaporated instantly, replaced by terror. He rushed to her side, placing his hand on her forehead. Her skin was burning hot. She's burning up, he said, his voice breaking. Dr. Ramirez immediately shifted into professional mode, despite the hurt still evident in her eyes. She called for nurses and helped transfer Lily back to her room. The next few hours were a blur of activity, tests, medications, ice packs, and worried whispers. By evening, Lily's fever was raging higher than ever. She tossed restlessly in her hospital bed, her skin flushed and damp. Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling utterly powerless. Each labored breath she took was like a knife in his heart. Dr. Ramirez came to check on them several times, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to look at her. The weight of his earlier words sat heavy in his chest, mixing with his fear for Lily until he could hardly breathe. Around midnight, with Lily finally sleeping fitfully under the effects of fever reducers, Ethan found himself wandering the quiet hospital halls. His feet carried him to the small chapel near the emergency room, a place he'd passed many times but never entered. The chapel was empty and dark, except for the soft glow of votive candles near the altar. Ethan slumped into a pew in the back row, his body feeling like it was made of lead. The flickering candlelight danced across the walls, but he barely noticed it through his tears. He stared at the candles, remembering how just days ago he'd stood in a circle of prayer at the church picnic, feeling so full of hope and faith. Now, sitting alone in the darkness, he couldn't find the words to pray. The silence of the chapel pressed in around him, broken only by his ragged breathing. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? The memory of Dr. Ramirez's face when he'd thrown her son's death back at her haunted him. She'd only ever tried to help, and he'd repaid her kindness with cruelty. But the anger and fear were still there, tangled up with guilt and shame until he couldn't separate one emotion from another. The candles continued their eternal dance, but Ethan remained frozen in place, unable to move forward, unable to go back, unable even to form the simplest prayer for his daughter's life. Ethan's eyes fluttered open to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room. His neck screamed in protest as he lifted his head from the uncomfortable vinyl bench. How long had he been here? The events of yesterday crashed back into his consciousness. The canceled treatment, his angry outburst at Dr. Ramirez, Lily's relapse. Two nurses stood at their station nearby, speaking in hushed tones they thought he couldn't hear. Poor man hasn't left for days, one whispered, sorting medication charts. Jenny said he's been sleeping on that bench all week. I offered him a cot in the on-call room, the other replied, shaking her head. But he won't take it, says he needs to stay close to his daughter. Ethan pushed himself up, his joints protesting every movement. His work clothes were wrinkled beyond repair, and the stubble on his face had grown past scratchy into the beginnings of an unkempt beard. He caught his reflection in a darkened window. He barely recognized himself. The walk to Lily's room felt longer than usual, each step weighted with exhaustion and defeat. Outside her door, he paused as he heard Dr. Ramirez's voice inside. His shame from yesterday's outburst was still too raw. He waited in the hallway until she emerged, pretending to study a bulletin board as she passed. If she noticed him, she didn't show it. Inside, Lily lay pale against the white hospital sheets, her normally bright eyes dulled with fatigue. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in this endless nightmare. She managed a weak smile when she saw him. "Morning, Daddy," "Morning, sweetheart." He kissed her forehead, trying not to notice how much warmer it felt than yesterday. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted. "But I finished another drawing." She pointed to her sketchbook, where she'd drawn what looked like a garden full of butterflies. The lines were shaky, evidence of how weak she'd become. A nurse entered with morning medications, and Ethan stepped back to let her work. While she checked Lily's vitals, she handed him a stack of papers, more bills, more forms, more reminders of his inability to protect his daughter. He stuffed them into his back pocket without looking at them. He'd deal with those later somehow. Right now, Lily needed him present, needed him strong. Later that afternoon, while Lily napped, Ethan wandered down to the cafeteria for coffee. As he approached the entrance, he heard familiar voices, parents of another child on Lily's floor. He instinctively stepped behind a pillar, not ready for social interaction. "It just breaks my heart," the woman was saying. "Did you know he sold his truck? And Sharon from church said he's been working double shifts at the garage whenever he can leave the hospital." "I heard he even sold his wife's wedding ring," her companion replied. "Everything he had, given up for his little girl. And now with the treatment canceled." Ethan's face burned with shame. He didn't want their pity, didn't want to be the subject of gossip and sad head-shaking. He turned and walked away, coffee forgotten, their words echoing in his head. Back in Lily's room, he found her awake, looking through her drawing pad. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than even a few days ago. When she looked up at him, her eyes held a wisdom no child should have to possess. "Daddy?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Yes, baby? Are we going to be okay?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He swallowed hard, forcing his face into what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Of course we are, sweetheart. Of course we are." The words felt hollow, even as he said them. She nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. She went back to her drawings, and Ethan turned away, blinking back tears. The rest of the day passed in a blur of medical checks, uncomfortable dozing in the bedside chair, and pretending everything was fine whenever Lily was awake. As evening approached, a different nurse came to help Lily get ready for bed. "Time to fluff these pillows," the nurse said cheerfully, helping Lily sit up. As she lifted the pillow, an envelope fell to the floor. Ethan picked it up. It was sealed, with no name written on it. He glanced questioningly at the nurse, but she seemed just as surprised. "What is it, Dad?" Lily asked, curiosity brightening her tired face. With trembling fingers, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of bills, hundreds of dollars, and a handwritten note on simple white paper. The message was brief: "You're not alone." He stared at the money in his hands, his vision blurring. The bills weren't crisp and new from a bank. They were worn, folded, real money from real people. 20 here, 50 there, whatever people could spare. Some of the bills were wrinkled, as if they'd been pulled from tip jars or savings stashes. His hands shook as he counted. Over $2,000, gathered in secret, slipped under his daughter's pillow by unknown members of his community. The same community he'd been too proud to lean on, too stubborn to accept help from. "Dad?" Lily's voice brought him back to the present. "What's wrong?" He realized tears were running down his face. He quickly wiped them away, but not before Lily saw them. She reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "It's okay to cry sometimes, Daddy," she said softly. "You told me that, remember?" Ethan looked at his daughter, his brave, wise, beautiful daughter, and at the envelope in his other hand. The note's simple message seemed to pulse with quiet power. "You're not alone." The hospital corridors stretched endlessly before Ethan, their polished linoleum floors gleaming under the harsh fluorescent emergency lights that hummed overhead. His worn work boots made soft squeaking sounds with each hesitant step, the only noise breaking the profound silence that settled over the medical center like a heavy blanket. The envelope of donations trembled in his calloused hands, the paper slightly damp from his nervous perspiration. Each footfall seemed to echo his thundering heartbeat as shame and desperation warred within his chest. The late hour had transformed the usually bustling hospital into something almost ghostly. Nurses moved like quiet shadows between rooms, their soft-soled shoes whispering against the floor. The occasional beep of monitoring equipment drifted from behind closed doors, But otherwise, the world felt suspended in time. Ethan's throat felt dry as sandpaper as he approached the administrative wing, where Dr. Ramirez's office waited like a beacon in the darkness. Through the frosted glass panel of her door, warm yellow light spilled into the dim hallway. He could make out her silhouette, hunched over her desk, shoulders curved with exhaustion yet still working diligently through a stack of patient files. Her dedication even at this ungodly hour made his chest tighten with fresh guilt. How many times had she stayed late because of cases like Lily's? How many sleepless nights had she endured, fighting for children whose parents couldn't fight for themselves? Ethan's hand hovered over the door handle for what felt like an eternity. The memory of his harsh words from days before played on repeat in his mind, the way her face had crumpled when he'd accused her of offering false hope, the hurt that had flashed in her eyes before she'd composed herself with professional dignity. He'd been drowning in fear and had lashed out at the one person trying to throw him a lifeline. Finally, he forced himself to knock. 3 soft taps that seemed to thunder in the quiet hallway. "Come in," came her tired voice from within, slightly muffled by the door. Dr. Ramirez glanced up from her paperwork, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Surprise flickered across her weathered features as Ethan stepped into the warm circle of lamplight. She carefully set down her pen and folded her hands on the cluttered desk, waiting with the patient expression of someone accustomed to difficult conversations in the small hours of the night. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended, like gravel scraped against concrete. "I was wrong to lash out at you the way I did. You've been nothing but kind to us from the very beginning, and I." His voice cracked like ice breaking under pressure. The words he'd rehearsed during his walk down the corridor suddenly felt inadequate, too small to contain the magnitude of his regret. Unable to remain standing under the crushing weight of his emotions, he sank heavily into the worn leather chair across from her desk. His broad shoulders, which had carried so much for so long, finally sagged with defeat. "I'm just so scared," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he dropped his head into his work-roughened hands. "I can't lose her like I lost Sarah. I can't survive that again. But I don't know how to save her anymore. And I'm so bone-deep tired of having to be strong every single minute of every single day." Dr. Ramirez's expression softened like snow melting in spring sunshine. She rose gracefully from behind her desk, her movements careful and deliberate, and came to settle in the chair beside him. The gesture erased the professional distance between them, transforming the sterile office into something more intimate and safe. "I know," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of shared understanding. "Believe me, Ethan, I understand that particular kind of fear better than most people ever should." Ethan lifted his head slowly, meeting her gaze through eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your son?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the pain that flickered across her features like lightning. She nodded, a shadow of old grief passing over her face like clouds across the Sunday. "Michael. He was 12 when we lost him to leukemia. I blamed myself for years afterward, thinking if I'd just worked harder, fought the system more aggressively, called in more favors." She took a shaky breath, her professional composure cracking to reveal the mother's heart beneath. "But what I learned through all that pain, Ethan, is that we're not meant to fight these impossible battles alone. We're not designed to carry that kind of weight by ourselves." Ethan pulled the crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket with trembling fingers, holding it up like evidence of something he couldn't quite believe. "The community came together and raised this money," he said, his voice thick with wonder and disbelief. "I don't deserve their help. I've been pushing everyone away for so long, building walls so high I forgot there was a world beyond them." "That's where you're absolutely wrong," Dr. Ramirez said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned hard truths through bitter experience. "Love isn't about deserving, Ethan. It's about connection, about recognizing that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. It's about letting others share your burden so you don't break under the weight of it." She reached out and squeezed his shoulder gently, the touch warm and reassuring. "Let me help you fight for Lily. Together, we can make this work. Together, we can move mountains." For a long moment that stretched like taffy, Ethan sat in absolute silence, wrestling with the pride that had been both his shield and his prison for so many years. He could feel something hard and brittle inside his chest, beginning to crack and soften, like ice thawing after a long winter. Finally, he nodded, the simple gesture feeling like the most important decision of his life. "Okay," he whispered, the word barely audible but heavy with surrender and hope. "Okay. I'm ready to stop fighting this alone." Dr. Ramirez smiled, the expression transforming her tired face and making her look years younger. She pulled her laptop closer, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard with renewed energy and purpose. "I've already drafted several appeals to the hospital board," she said, her voice taking on the crisp efficiency of someone shifting into battle mode. "With these community donations as seed money, we can demonstrate that there's genuine local support for Lily's case. I also have contacts at several faith-based charities and medical foundations who specialize in exactly these kinds of situations." They worked through the remainder of the night, the office becoming a war room filled with determination and hope. Dr. Ramirez's medical expertise combined seamlessly with Ethan's heartfelt story, creating a compelling narrative that painted Lily not just as a patient, but as a beloved daughter whose community refused to let her fall. They drafted letters that balanced clinical facts with emotional truth, made calls to contacts in different time zones, and built a comprehensive case that would be impossible to ignore. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, they had secured tentative commitments from 2 major charitable organizations and scheduled an emergency meeting with the hospital board for later that week. 3 days later, Ethan stood beside Dr. Ramirez in the hospital's largest conference room, his best shirt pressed and his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The room was packed beyond capacity, with community members who had come to show their support. Church members sat next to garage customers, elderly neighbors beside young families, and even Ethan's gruff boss, Tom, had cleaned up and put on a tie for the occasion. One by one, they stood to speak about the impact Ethan and Lily had made on their lives. Small stories of kindness, moments of grace, and the quiet heroism of a father's love that had inspired an entire community to action. The testimonies painted a picture of connections and compassion that reached far beyond medical charts and treatment protocols. When the board chairman finally announced that they would reinstate the treatment program with matched funding from the hospital's charitable foundation, the room erupted in quiet cheers and gentle applause. Ethan felt tears sliding down his cheeks in warm tracks, but for the first time in months, he didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. These were tears of gratitude and relief, of burden shared and hope restored. That evening, as golden sunlight slanted through the hospital windows, Lily received her first new treatment in the resumed program. Color had already begun returning to her pale cheeks, and her breathing seemed easier as she dozed peacefully in her hospital bed. The IV drip that had once seemed like a tether to uncertainty now felt like a lifeline to the future. Ethan sat in his familiar chair beside her bed, holding her small, warm hand in both of his. Her fingers, no longer cold and fragile, squeezed back with surprising strength. But tonight was fundamentally different from all the others that had come before. Tonight, his sleepless vigil wasn't born of desperate fear or crushing isolation. Instead, his heart overflowed with gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence in his chest, gratitude for Dr. Ramirez's unwavering support and expertise, for the community's overwhelming generosity and love, for the miracle of modern medicine, and the dedication of every nurse and doctor who had cared for his daughter, and most of all, for his precious Lily's steadily improving health. He squeezed her hand gently and whispered into the peaceful quiet of the room, "We're going to be okay, sweetheart. We're really going to be okay." The automatic hospital door slid open with a gentle whoosh, releasing a flood of warm sunshine onto Ethan's face. He blinked against the brightness, his hands steady on the handles of Lily's wheelchair. The moment felt surreal. After months of sterile hospital rooms and beeping machines, they were finally heading home. Dr. Ramirez walked beside them, her usual professional demeanor softened by a warm smile. Her white coat caught the morning light as she carried a small bag of Lily's medications and care instructions. "Ready for your grand exit, sweetheart?" Ethan asked, leaning down close to Lily's ear. Lily nodded eagerly, her face glowing. She looked stronger already, her cheeks showing hints of healthy color. The girl clutched her favorite sketchbook, the one that had been her constant companion during the long hospital stay. "I can't wait to sleep in my own bed," Lily said, bouncing slightly in the wheelchair. "And see Mr. Whiskers." Their elderly neighbor had been taking care of their cat during their absence. As they approached Ethan's pickup truck, Dr. Ramirez helped gather their belongings. "Remember what we discussed about the medication schedule," she said, handing Ethan the bag. "And don't hesitate to call if you have any questions, day or night." "Thank you," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." The words felt inadequate for all she had done, for the battles she had fought alongside them. The drive home was filled with Lily's excited chatter. She pointed out familiar landmarks they passed, as if seeing them for the first time. Ethan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, drinking in the sight of his daughter's animated face. When they turned onto their street, Lily gasped. Their modest house had been transformed. Colorful balloons bobbed in the breeze, tied to the porch railing. A huge banner stretched across the front of the house read, "Welcome home, Lily," in rainbow letters. Neighbors stood on the lawn, waving and cheering. "Dad, look!" Lily exclaimed, pressing her face against the car window. Ethan's vision blurred with tears as he pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Henderson from next door had organized a welcome committee. There were familiar faces from church, parents of Lily's schoolmates, even some of the nurses who had cared for her were there on their day off. Dr. Ramirez's car pulled up behind them. She had followed them home to help get Lily settled and do one final check of their medicine supplies. As she stepped out, several neighbors greeted her warmly. She had become part of their extended family during the long hospital stay. Inside, the house was spotless. Someone had cleaned thoroughly, and vases of fresh flowers sat on every surface. The refrigerator was stocked with home-cooked meals in labeled containers. A stack of Get Well cards covered the coffee table. "This is amazing," Ethan murmured, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of their community. Over the next few hours, well-wishers stopped by briefly to welcome Lily home. They brought small gifts, books, stuffed animals, art supplies. Ethan noticed how each visitor seemed genuinely overjoyed to see Lily's improvement. Their love and support wrapped around his little family like a warm blanket. In the afternoon, while Lily napped on the couch, Dr. Ramirez helped Ethan organize the medications in the kitchen. She showed him how to use the pill organizer and reviewed the warning signs to watch for. "Lily's latest test results are very encouraging," she said, leaning against the counter. "Her body is responding well to the treatment." Ethan nodded, studying the medication schedule they'd taped to the refrigerator. "I never thought we'd get here," he admitted quietly. There were moments when his voice trailed off, unable to finish the dark thought. Dr. Ramirez touched his arm gently. "I know, but watching you with her, your unwavering faith and devotion, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" She was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. "After I lost my son, I closed myself off, threw myself into work. I couldn't bear to get emotionally invested in my patients' lives." She smiled sadly. "But seeing how you fought for Lily, how you never gave up hope even when things seemed impossible, it helped me believe in love again. In miracles." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. "We couldn't have made it without you," he said honestly. "You went above and beyond, fighting the hospital board, arranging the treatment trial, staying late to check on her. That's what family does," Dr. Ramirez replied simply. Later that evening, after the visitors had gone and the excitement had settled, Ethan helped Lily get ready for bed. Her room looked exactly as she'd left it months ago. Stuffed animals arranged on her bed, crayon drawings taped to the walls. But now there was a new drawing pinned above her headboard, one she'd done in the hospital. It showed 3 figures holding hands. Lily, Ethan, and Dr. Ramirez. "Can you read me a story?" Lily asked as she climbed into bed, her voice already heavy with sleep. "Of course, baby." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed and picked up her favorite book from the nightstand. The familiar weight of it in his hands felt like coming home. As he read, Lily's eyes grew heavier until she finally drifted off. Ethan carefully marked their place in the book and set it aside. He pulled the covers up to her chin and kissed her forehead, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. Instead of the usual anxiety that had kept him awake during their hospital stay, a profound sense of peace settled over him. He sank into the chair beside her bed, the same chair he'd spent countless nights in at the hospital. But tonight was different. In the quiet darkness, Ethan closed his eyes and whispered prayers of thanksgiving. He gave thanks for Dr. Ramirez's guidance, for their neighbors' generosity, for the strength of community and faith that had carried them through. But most of all, he gave thanks for the steady sound of Lily's peaceful breathing, here in their home at last. What happens next will leave you breathless. Click the next video to uncover the shocking truth. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. And comment below with your theories about what Dr. Ramirez's late-night call could mean. Could Ethan's journey be far from over? Stories like these aren't just about characters, they're about all of us, about the love, faith, and resilience we share as human beings. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and I invite you to share your reflections in the comments what touched you the most in Ethan and Lily's journey. If you believe in the power of stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us that compassion can change everything, please consider subscribing or following. And above all, remember this: you are seen, you are valued, and your presence here matters. From my heart to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Stay hopeful, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next story.